Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to build off of the previous one where I talked about using news articles for language learning. In this video, I'll do the same thing, talking about using news articles for language learning, and I'll give you an example of an article I did this with to help one of my students. One thing I want to note about doing this kind of activity is it's really useful for somebody who's intermediate to advanced. It's good for somebody who, say, wants to go study in a country that speaks the target language, because you know that your coursework will be in that language. You'll be doing lots of reading and you'll need to be truly understanding what you're reading to be able to keep up in your courses. So an activity like this is really useful for somebody like that. Also for somebody who wants to be a working professional in that language, because again, you're probably going to be conducting a lot of your work in that language. A lot of it will include reading and writing, so you want to make sure those skills are really strong. Also, this is really great for, say, somebody who just wants to, if they're, I don't know, let's say you're going to retire and move to another country where they speak that target language, and you want to be able to read the local news there and have discussions with locals about what's going on in the country. This would be like a really great exercise for somebody like that. If you are, say, going to go on vacation somewhere for like 2 weeks and you just want to be able to order in a restaurant and read a bus schedule, you don't need to do something this in depth. So this kind of activity is really for the kind of student who really is going to need the language to do some heavy lifting. So the first step that we talked about in the last video was how to pick which article to use. So if you're familiar with the language, you're pretty advanced at this point, you can just go straight to the news source itself, peruse, and pick out something that looks interesting to you. If you're still at a more intermediate level or lower advanced and you're not quite sure yet which, say, publications to use, what you could do is look at news articles in your own language and then go and find one in the target language you're learning. So what I did with this example was I was watching the news and I heard about a story that I thought was really interesting about how scientists and musicians used AI to make Beethoven's last symphony, what they think would have been his last symphony if he had lived long enough to finish it himself. So I knew the topic already. So then, since I saw it on the news, I had to go and find a written article about it. So I went online, did my search, found something that I thought was a good length for the student. The second thing I did was, once I had the article, I had to scan it to see which vocabulary words I didn't think she already knew. So I went through this article and I found quite a few new vocabulary words, and I think part of the reason why there were so many new words for her was because there were a lot of topic-specific vocabulary. So if she has never learned about orchestras or symphonies before, she wouldn't have the vocabulary to talk about that specific topic. So what I did when I was making her vocabulary list, I actually made two different lists. I made a main list, which is vocabulary she should just know in general, and then a second list for specific to orchestras and symphonies, because I don't know if that's something she even really needs to know right now. But let's say she herself plays an instrument and might be in an orchestra someday herself, all that vocabulary would be super useful for her. Or if she's just super interested in that topic and she wants to read a lot more about it, then yeah, that would be really great vocabulary for her to work on for a period of time, so that way she's able to retain it and use it more freely in the future. But if it's just kind of like a nice to know thing, then I think it's totally worth separating that vocabulary out and just saying here, as we're reading the article, you're probably going to need a reference to understand when they're using this vocabulary, but this doesn't mean you actually need to memorize it right now, because you're probably not likely to use it a lot. Regardless of who the person is, though, the general vocabulary list should be extremely useful. So there were like 20 words on that particular list that I thought would be good for her. And then we had a few phrases that I separated out as well. So that's not to say that she doesn't already know some of these words. It's just what I anticipate her needing help with. So what I did in going through this, I was imagining I was her and I was picking out words and phrases that I assumed she would need help with. So if you're doing this on your own, you'll know for sure what you know and you don't know. If it's something you've seen before, but you don't remember or you never actually really learned the word, put that on the list too, because this is a really great time to reinforce something that you might be slightly familiar with. Also remember that if you have a lot of words on your list, don't be intimidated. What you're going to do for now is just define those words, and then later when you go back and read, you will use your vocabulary list to help you to understand it in the context. I wouldn't recommend, let's say you pull out 40 words to try to learn them all at once. That sounds like a bit too much to handle in one small go. But what you can do later is use vocabulary building exercises and activities to help build up that vocabulary. So for now, make your list and then pull out what you would think would be the 10 most interesting words for you to focus on for now, because you're likely to see them quite a bit in the future, and there are definitely things you can do to build that vocabulary up over time. The next thing that I did was I read the article in full, and then as I read it, I paraphrased it paragraph by paragraph. So that's what you will do as well when you are picking out your article. And in this case, what I did was literally bit by bit. Articles tend to be written in short paragraphs, so it's like for each paragraph a sentence or two to summarize what it was. I didn't overly emphasize using the vocabulary that I had already pulled out. That vocabulary I pulled out was mainly to help with understanding the article, not for paraphrasing it. I'd recommend not overlying on that vocabulary at this point in time, just because in the paraphrasing process, you want to use the words you already know to say the same idea. Because when we use language, we're always expressing ourselves in many different ways, using lots of different vocabulary. So at this point, I want you to pull from what you already know, as opposed to trying to reuse what's already in the article and then just saying the same thing the article says in the same way. We don't really want to do that at this point. Then, after you've fully paraphrased your article, you can read through your paraphrased article to see how you did, clean up anything you feel like needs cleaning up, and then you can read the original article again, and it should make total sense. So, you know, if you're using the article about Beethoven, in this case, you should fully grasp like how these scientists and musicians and experts came together to create what they think would have been his last symphony if he could have finished it, which I thought was super interesting. Then the last thing you'll do is you can summarize the article. If it's a short article, again, like 3 or 5 sentences should cover it. If you need more, then do more. With this particular activity that I did, I imagined I was the student doing the work in order to show you. But what I will actually do in reality is show her the paraphrased article first, because it's written in a way that I think she will understand it with little to no help from me, because it'll be at her reading level. So I've simplified the language basically in the paraphrased version. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show her the original article and see how much of it she's able to understand after having read the simplified version. The reason I would do this in this order as a learning exercise for the student is that if she has the general idea of what's going on, if it's been explained to her in language that she understands, then when she sees the more advanced version of it, using more advanced language and phrasing, she is more likely to understand that advanced language and that advanced phrasing because she knows what it's about. Which goes back to what I was saying in the last video. It's perfectly fine if you read about the topic in your native language or a language you already know, and then read about it in your target language. Because at that point, you already know what you need to glean from the article in terms of the actual knowledge of what they're talking about. So that opens up some space for you to focus more on the language. Oh, so that's how they make that idea. That's how they were explaining how the computer did blah, 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 or how the group of experts met to sort this and that out, you know, in the particular case of, you know, creating this symphony. So that way you can make those connections between meaning and language much more easily, and not be like stuck in maybe some frustration of like, I have no idea what they're talking about. So I hope this explanation was helpful for you. Again, it was kind of like a repeat of the last video, but I wanted to give you more of a example so you could see side by side exactly what I'm talking about and what it would look like in process. Later, we can take this vocabulary list of words we've pulled from the context of the article and then use that to inspire our vocabulary building activities. So I hope that was helpful for you. Please give it a like if this was useful, and leave me any comments with questions or feedback about how this process was for you. Hope you have a great time doing it. Take care. See you. Bye.